we've been lucky enough to have some wonderful guests on these wine therapy sessions over the last year and try some wonderful wines. However, none will be better. Gosh, I'm putting a lot of pressure on you here, Anselmo.
Don't.
but no, Anselmo is an extremely dear and old friend. The San Leonardo estate, I have spent an awful lot of time expounding the virtues of, and certainly not just me. Because we have Anselmo here, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking. It seems crazy when he's here to do the hard work. I will probably interject occasionally because he's far too modest to mention all of the amazing awards and scores and ratings which the estate has received over the years. But I must just say, if you're not familiar with San Leonardo, this will be a real eye-opener for you. The estate is unquestionably one of my favorites, not just in Italy, but the whole world. The extraordinary consistency has been noted time and time again as being unrivaled by anyone anywhere. And in terms of how the wine is and what the wine is, I think it's a wine which everyone seems to love and embrace. If you love elegant, classic, patrician wine, San Leonardo is for you. If you love Bordeaux blends, San Leonardo is for you. If you like old school wines with great class and elan and precision, San Leonardo is for you. Still, if you like wines that are hedonic and supple and fragrant, San Leonardo is for you. So I think we're going to have a lot of fun tonight. I'm going to shut up now before I gush too much. But it does give me tremendous pleasure to pass over to my dear friend, Anselmo Guerrieri Gonzaga from San Leonardo. Take us away, Anselmo.
Tom, thank you. What an introduction, really. Good evening to everybody. Lovely to see so many faces. We are not used to seeing each other so much anymore, so it's still a lovely mean of communication, and this is still a great opportunity to share. And well, Tom is a really a dear friend to me, and many years that we have been working together and drinking together, I would say mostly. That's really what we've been doing. And well, thank you to Honest Grapes, to all the group, to Nathan and all the group for hosting this lovely tasting. And they're all of them dear friends, and a lot of admiration for the great results of this company has been doing these last years. So let me introduce you our estate. So we are located in Trentino, which is far north in Italy, the north and eastern part of Italy. If some of you are familiar with Verona, we are just 30 miles north of Verona. So just to give you an idea. San Leonardo has a long history, more than 1,000 years. And in fact, the first time that there is a significant story tied to it is around the 500 after Christ, which was the wedding of a very important lady and man in the countryside in this location. But the first time that something was built here was around the 620, when a group of prisoners from this region was freed by the bishop of the region. They were kept prisoners by the French. And when they came back, they built a little chapel in honor of this French saint, which was San Leonardo Noblac. And this was the saint patron of prisoners. And so these prisoners, when they arrived in this valley back home, finally, they built a little chapel to say thank you for being freed. Around the year 1000, then the Church of Verona sent here a group of monks who built a chapel on top, a larger one, and then a monastery. And San Leonardo has been a monastery for about 450 years. And the objective of this place was hospitality. So there was the only Roman road going from the central part of Italy up to Austria and then to Germany. And the people passing by could find a place where to rest the horses, sleep, eat, and possibly drink. And we hope it was decent wine at the time. But let's imagine how wine was a much different thing respect to today. Today we are hedonists. We drink for pleasure, not only, but also to be happy, but especially to enjoy the wine. Back in the days, but I would say, if we look back even 70 years ago only, wine was an essential part of the diets of the people, because it was a lot of calories. We must imagine we did not have so much food as we have today. So wine was really an important part of what food was, of the diet of the day. So wine was really having a very important part in the lives of people, as it is today, luckily. This place then was then it was given by the church. Suddenly the monastery ended, and this place was rented out to private people, which were paying, obviously, taxes to the church, to the local church. This was all about it. And my family started working here around 1740. And they fell in love with this place, and they tried to purchase it many times from the church, but the church would not sell it. And then finally, in 1770, we succeeded in purchasing it back from the church. And it became our family house. And the first real winemaker of the family was my great-grandfather in around the 1860s, 1870s. He was very passionate of winemaking. He was a diplomatic around Europe at the time, and he married a very, very rich woman. And they decided that they did not want to move anymore. This lady was from Ukraine. It was a Russian lady, and they decided to live on the estate all the year round. And he was very passionate of vineyard, and he had collected a lot of vines around Europe, from Riesling, Pinot Noir, and Carmenère, which he probably thought that was Cabernet at the time. And so 1870 is really one of the important dates, because he starts experimenting a lot in the cellar. And in fact, we have found the diary of his sister, who was telling that her brother was living in the cellar and making fabulous wines. This is what my back aunt was saying. We don't know if they were excellent, but at least she thought so, and probably her brother was very happy about this. Then my great-grandfather was not an incredible man about wine, but my grandfather was. He was a very good producer. And then, but if today the estate is famous, let's say that if the wine is good, let's say today, we owe it to my father, who is from 1938. He's still fully active, luckily. He's a lovely gentleman. He's much more lovely today than he used to be 20 years ago. He was more strict now. He's in his 80s, let's say. He's very, very sweet, he has become. And my father was born in 1938 under the bombs in Rome. And so my grandfather decided to move his house in Florence, because the Roman house was completely bombed. And Florence was perfectly in the middle between Trentino and Rome. And so my father grew up in Florence for a certain time, but then my father did not really enjoy studying very much. And my grandfather instead was a very strict man who had been in World War I and desired a very good education for his son. So he sent him to boarding school very quickly at the age of 11. And my father was desperate about boarding school. He actually changed many boarding schools because nobody wanted him, because he was escaping, he was doing terrible things. And if you look at him today, you would not say, but he was a terrible student. And he ended up his studies in Switzerland. And then my grandfather, who was a visionary, I would say at that time, he said, now you will study enology. And this was certainly not an advice, this was a very clear indication, which had no possibility of answering. And my father went to study enology in Switzerland, and he found his passion, and he really studied extremely well. He graduated in 3 years. He really found, what his talent was. And unfortunately, my grandfather made him a terrible surprise the day he was graduating, and he was sure of coming back to work in the estate. My grandfather hired a winemaker the day before he was coming back. So it was clear that there was no possibility for him. And the winemaker was even 1 month younger than my father. So it was not even to say, I had to hire somebody with a lot of experience. It was clear that that was not the case. But, I always say that my father, that has been his luck, because my father had to go off and make his own career by himself. And he went back to Florence, where the family had still the house, and you know, he started consulting for many estates in Tuscany, revolutionizing a lot of the methods at that time, because he was very advanced. You know, he had studied enology on the French way, which was definitely more advanced than the Italian way in the 50s. And then he ended up working, after quite a few years, he ended up working in San Guido. San Guido is the famous property where Sassicaia is born, with the Marquis Mario Incisa, which was a fantastic gentleman of the time, a very, very special gentleman, who was very tied to my grandfather. They were very friends. They had spent a lot of time, they had a house in Stade, both the families, and he loved very much my father, who was in boarding school there in the Rosé, and he was always making him taste, already at that time, before my father was going to study enology, great Bordeaux wines. And when my father worked for him, he would open for him fantastic bottles, which were not only difficult to taste, but difficult to find. You know, at that time, Italy was not so much into importing wines from around the world like it is today, where you can find anything. It was very difficult in Italy to find great Bordeaux. And he was the gentleman who really taught my father about the passion for, you know, great Bordeaux, for elegant wines, for wines which had the ability to age. And so I call Mario Incisa the enological godfather of my father, because he is really the man who gave my father the passion. You know, and even if it sounds very, how do you say, rhetoric thing, passion really is the drive, and in wine it is, because you need to have a dream, and the results of this dream come many years after you start, you know, with your dream. And this is something that is unbelievable to some of my friends when I tell them that to make a bottle of San Leonardo, I have to plant the vines and wait for about 25 years at least before that wine goes into the San Leonardo, then another 5 years to release the bottle. So about 30 years from when I put the plant in the earth, it takes 30 years to get the bottle of San Leonardo. They won't believe me. So that is always interesting. And my father had that dream. My father then had many other things, but he came back in the estate around the 70s, and there is when he introduced two great things, which were Cabernet Sauvignon, because the Carmenère, which my great-grandfather had brought in, everybody was calling it Cabernet Franc at the time. And so my father knew that we had Merlot, we had Cabernet Franc, but we were lacking Cabernet Sauvignon. And then he introduced in 1978 the first Guyot, because we only had the Pergola, you know, which is this lovely, I have a brochure over here. Let me show you just a picture, because it's such a lovely way of growing vines that really, it's something fantastic. It's like a tunnel of leaves where the grapes hang from the roof. So it's really beautiful. So we had only this system in Trentino. Let me show you just a very quick picture of my father, because that is where, and I have a lovely picture of both of us, but this is my father here. And so he introduced the Guyot and the Cabernet. And then in 1982, he made a fantastic harvest, and he decided to give at that time birth to his dream, which was to create the great Bordeaux of Italy, a great Bordeaux of Italy. You know, when we talk about a chateau, in the mind of my father, who always said, you know, I want to create a great Italian chateau, was the fact of having a family, a house of the family, and the vines around it, with all people who were living on the estate, and which were creating all together a sort of community. And this is what San Leonardo is today. We still have many of the employees who live on the estate. We give them the house for free, because the importance of having somebody who knows the land where he was born in, who knows the climate, who has the passion for this place, is what makes San Leonardo what it is today. You know, it's a small company. We are nothing of incredible, but it's it feels like a large family, and I am absolutely convinced. I cannot prove it scientifically, but the love of the people, the atmosphere there is in this place, is something that is then given to the vines and results finally in the wines. And this is something that is, I am very, very convinced of this.
And Anselmo, I remember before I say anything, could I suggest that everyone starts with their Riesling if you haven't already, because
Absolutely.
we're going to continue with the story, but we're starting from a
Yes,
wine.
you're right, Tom. Sorry, I talk a little bit too much.
No, we must come back to this for sure. But I think everyone's thirsty, but also
Absolutely.
we're sort of starting with, in a way, the end of the journey, or at least the current position of the journey with one of the more recent wines, and then we will go back to the Grand Vin itself. I do remember you saying to me years and years ago, with relation to what you've just said about the importance of family and the extended community, I think you said you'd be very happy if San Leonardo was famous, or even just grew potatoes, so long as it was the same families who'd been involved in the production of them every year. That was the important thing.
You know what I told you? I told you that even if tomorrow wine was not anymore a product of interest to no one, we would maybe produce coffee, and I'm sure it would be a great coffee, because the passion of these people who know their land. Let's hope that the climate is not right for coffee, because that would be really a disaster. But I'm sure these people would make great coffee. This is for sure.
So the Riesling which we have, I mean, this is something very new and very different.
Absolutely.
Not so new now, but before we return to the story of the San Leonardo red, I mean, tell us about the Riesling.
Absolutely. Well, we do not produce the white wines inside of the estate. My father explanted all the white vines in around the 80s. He was convinced of the red grapes for this place, and I totally agree with him. But the reason was an old wine of the house, because that is the first wine which had a label in San Leonardo around the 1870s. In fact, this you don't know, Tom, but I found the menu. Let me see if I can find it while we're talking. I found the menu of the wedding of my great-great-grandmother in 1874, and the wine, aside of Veuve Clicquot, was the Riesling of San Leonardo. So anyways, we have a long tradition on that. And I wanted to recreate it, and I went to the northern part of Trentino, which is lovely, and in this valley called Val di Cimbria, which is phenomenal. It's beautiful. It's this very black stone made of porphyric stone, and we selected one single hectare where to grow this, where there was a very good Riesling that I had tasted before, but where we were convinced with our winemaker Carlo Ferrini to make something much better than what was already coming out. And I am passionate of Riesling of the Mosel and of the Rheingau, whatever. They are fantastic wines. We did not want to copy them. And with Ferrini, we are also very passionate of whites from Burgundy, which are phenomenal. And what would a white from Burgundy be without a touch of wood? You know, I mean, it will lose one of its more prominent characteristics, I would say. And so we decided to make our own version of Riesling, which had to be somewhere in the middle between Burgundy and Rheingau. And it had to be an interpretation of San Leonardo. So we used stainless steel to ferment the whites, which we only used the steel for the whites. And then we made aging half in stainless steel and half in a large tonneau of 700 liters of new wood, for the Riesling 2013 that you have on tasting, and the Riesling came out, and it has 1 year of aging in tonneau. And because we were convinced that the great acidity of this wine, which is typical of the Riesling, could hold very well the boisé notes, I would say, of the wood. I love, you know, I'm not a fan of wood normally, you know, Tom, very well this, but on the whites, on the other side, on the whites, when they are great, and they have great acidity, well, I'm a great fan of that. And so we tried our version. So I hope you enjoy it. But you go on the tasting, Tom.
Well, one thing I was going to say on the Riesling, and I'm lucky enough, actually, unlike most people, to have a bottle rather than the tube, and I opened it yesterday to taste. And what's fascinating is the evolution over that period of the evening. There's a sweetness there, and there's a balance which is incredibly attractive. You don't expect that from my limited experience of northern Italian Riesling. There's a lovely kind of floral creaminess coming out. That classic Riesling varietal character for sure. And I think you're right. The wood just supports it. It doesn't kind of press it down. It just allows it to flex its muscles a bit more. It's a very accomplished wine. And as you say, completely different from anything that you'd experience in, the Rheingau or Moselle, etc. Very, very interesting indeed. Yeah.
Thank you, Tom. I'm very glad that you like this.
Trina seems to agree with the word creamy, so
I see.
good.
I can read, yeah.
I'm getting off to a good start. Now, returning to the reds, and we are going to start our journey with the 2000s. So if everyone wants to get smelling that and tasting that, but Anselmo, I don't want to interrupt your narrative because the story. The story is fascinating, and people who don't know should know. So, we got as far, obviously, as your wayward father coming home in tow with Giacomo Takis, the great, dearly departed, probably greatest consultant enologist of his day for sure, and starting to fashion San Leonardo. So, take us through what happened next.
Well, so in 1982, he made this lovely harvest, and I tell you, my father had very little money in that moment. It was a very difficult time of his life as well, because after the wars, we had lost, the family had lost enormous amounts of money, and we had many properties, but these properties were taking out the money rather than giving it back. So my father inherited this property, but it was not as it is today, I would say. He really worked very much in order to bring it back. And in 1982, he bought, I think it was about 30 barrels in total. That was all he could afford. And he gave it a try, and he made a small revolution at that year. So let's start saying that all San Leonardos are made by, we pick up the grapes in September, October, depending, on the harvest time, the cool, the climate, the rain, because here it starts also to rain. And we ferment everything in concrete vats. We do not use stainless steel. It's a very simple cellar. We have no cooling, no heating in the cellar, and we use no selected yeast. It's all indigenous yeast, which is something which has become very rare today. It's not better or worse in terms of quality. It just gives a lot of identity because it's not reproducible. And that year, in 1982, my father made a great difference. At that time, we were putting a lot of grapes together, maybe from different fields and sometimes from different varieties, making what are called uvaggi. On that, in 1982, my father decided to ferment every single wine alone, singularly, in order to make the character of every field come out, So that was the important revolution. Understanding that the parcels were very important, and they were talking their own language. They had their own way of aging, and we had to choose the wood for every single vineyard. And it started this way, and then blending the wine after the 2 years of aging in wood. So right at the end, instead, in the beginning, they were blending it at the beginning, and then the wine which was born was very different at the time. So 1982 is really the turning point. San Leonardo was born as we know it today. It had a great success, and so my father really understood. And in 1984, end of 1984, he called in to consult. Well, he called Piero Antinori. Antinori is a very famous brand, but the gentleman who really is the genius behind is Piero Antinori, which is still the owner today, and he's a great friend of my father. They are just 1 week difference in age, so they grew up together in Florence. And my father called Piero and he said, Piero, I would love to ask consultancy by this gentleman Giacomo Takis. This name, is a very important name in Italy. We have Tignanello, Solaia, Sassicaia, so many great wines that today have been made by this gentleman who has revolutionized during the 70s, the 80s, the Italian wine panorama. And my father called and he said, you know, he wanted somebody, you know, there was very few people with whom to exchange at that time on a Bordeaux blend made in Trentino. So he called Pierantinori, and Pierantinori said, oh, don't worry, I send you up Giacomo Takis. Don't pay him because I'm already paying for him, but ask him whatever you need, because the more we make great wines now, the better it is for Italy. So this gentleman had a great vision about wine already at that time. And Giacomo Takis arrived and he perfectionated the blend of San Leonardo, which, you know, this gentleman was just beyond the limits of the ability of understanding the wines. It's like when you cook, you think of how the plate will taste in 20 minutes. When you make a wine, a blending, you think of how the wine will taste in 10, 20, 30 years. You know, this is the ability. It's a talent. You can be good at tasting, but blending is something I'm not good at blending. I'm terrible at blending, but some people really have an incredible talent, which is beyond. And so San Leonardo was perfectionated and success started really arriving. And the style has never been changed, by the way. It is still exactly the same. So you're tasting 2000, which is now 20 years and a half, going towards 21 years of age. But if you taste 1982, you will find the same characteristics behind the wine, of course, with a very different texture, because we have become better in doing it also during the, but the identity, you know. Today we talk about identity, not only in wines, and I'm sure that this horrible time we're living through of COVID has made us all think about focusing on what is essential, what is important. And we have done this on wine for many years, you know, concentrating on what is the primary quality of this wine. Why is this wine so? And this is called identity. And it's our, well, I've been very lucky in life because my father has passed on the estate to me to bring on, and the recent vintages I've been, let's say, I'm not the enologist. I coordinate, let's say, the talents behind this wine. But the idea is always the same, and trying to make wines in an elegant way, in a refined way, wines that can give you pleasure and that you can drink. And the last thing that I'm going to say, then we pass on maybe telling a bit of stories behind each wine, which something that I was telling to Tom before. San Leonardo is located in the middle of the mountains. You can see them behind Charlie, for example. These are the mountains of San Leonardo. And we are in a sort of canyon behind us. You know, I mean, they're massive and they're just behind you, you know, I mean, and to give you an idea, this is the mountain just in front of us. And you see the vines, and then the mountain is just there, you know, it's big chunk of rock. And we have 4 hours less sun than what 30 kilometers south Valpolicella is enjoying, which makes lovely wines. But these 4 hours less of sun allow us to still make 13 degrees alcohol wines. And this is something which is special today because it has become extremely difficult to make delicate wines, which is what we appreciate. There are many fantastic wines, even at 16 degrees. But this is not nor the best nor the worst wine, but it is unique. And this is something that we are trying to protect year after year, the identity of this wine.
And I think, Anselmo, you know, others have commented on this. Jancis Robinson, no less, referred to San Leonardo as surely the most consistent Bordeaux blend in northern Italy. And I remember being fortunate enough to do several verticals over the years, and it's quite incredible, not just the qualitative consistency, but the stylistic consistency right the way
through. That is for us more important than everything.
Yeah. Yeah. So with regard to the 2000, you know, it's a fascinating vintage.
Yes.
I think you suggested previously it was on release, it might have been a slightly hidden vintage by comparison to the 99 and the 01, but clearly I think everyone would agree it's drinking remarkably well now. So what was the character of this particular year?
I remember very well because I entered the estate on 2001. And I started working for my father in 2001. And the first vintage that I sold was, by the way, 1999, which today is probably maybe the best we have ever made right now. And I could not sell a bottle of that wine. It was the first job, of course, you go out, you sell. It's still the job that I do, part of. But I remember, because it was very green at the time, and I remember I was in the US and I could not sell bottles of this wine. It was too young for the market, you know. It was, and that was a very different time. So that was not an easy, we loved it, but the market did not really appreciate it when it came out. And then I remember when 2000 came out, I was more used to the wines of the 90s, which were slightly more aggressive, more green at the time. And 2000, I said, you know, I remember all the buzz that the French put on the market. They were, the ability of the French is by far superior to the ones of the Italians in creating stories and luxury around the product. And 2000 was, you remember, the best vintage of the millennium already. You know, I mean, they were right. It was the only one. So it was not wrong on that sense. But 2000 was when they started Bordeaux having those incredible price rise. I remember really changing time. And I remember, yeah, it was good San Leonardo, but I was not convinced. But I remember my father saying, this is a fantastic vintage. You will see within the years. I was not convinced. I thought it lacked body, it lacked acidity. It was more flat at the time. And then slowly, slowly, this vintage rose to become today one of the most pleasurable drinking wines that we have in the cellar, I would say. Maybe it is not as important as 2001, 4, or 2011, which have that, but pleasure is as important as body. You know, we always want the 100-point wines. You know, maybe 2001 is a 100-point wines, and 2000 is a 95 maybe. But then 2000, you drink it with a pleasure which is even superior to 2001 today. You know, that is very important. And it is less extreme as a wine, no? Both in terms of body, the slight green notes are less aggressive, and it was very well balanced off with the wood, I would say.
Yeah, it's yes, I think it's drinking remarkably well now. It seems to be getting better with age. I have to say, personally, it's an important vintage for me because it's the first vintage of San Leonardo I ever tried when I met it.
Of course.
I was noting that you know, you started off at San Leonardo, you know, having to go out and sell the wines, and today you are having to go out and sell the wines. Your career hasn't progressed very impressively,
no.
Sadly.
But I've been drinking a lot, I tell you.
Yeah. Oh well. You know,
much better in that.
there's hope for you yet. So we move on from the 2000 to the 2004, and the 2004 is a vintage which I think has universal critical acclaim. I certainly wouldn't say it was the year that put San Leonardo on the map, but for those who do look at sort of scores and points and things, I think the score from Monacolana at the Wine Advocate, sort of 97 plus, etc. You know,
for the time also, because they were scoring much less at the time.
Yeah, and so I think it's an incredible wine, the 04. So I mean, what is the sort of the step change, I guess, in power and intensity that you find with the 04? What happened here?
You know, that was a very warm summer. I was reading right now the amounts of rain, because I always remember, I never, there is one thing which really made a change on 2004, is that we ended the harvest on the 23rd of October, which is rare today. It started on the 5th of October and it ended on the 23rd of October. So this is really, to give you an idea, 2003, which was a very warm vintage, ended the harvest on the 12th of October. So here you have about another 10, 11, 12 days of huge thermic excursion, because October starts becoming very cold at night. And, you know, cool nights give color, perfumes. When they have sunny, dry times like October's, they can really make a huge difference. And you're right, Tom, 2004, I would say that 99 maybe is my favorite, but on the market, if we want to call it the market in sense of broad idea, which means passionate, the journalist, most 2004 is the vintage of San Leonardo, you know, maybe the most important one we have ever made, the ones with highest scores. I think Jancis rated it 19 on 20, which is quite rare for her to rate that.
Unheard of, in fact. But yes, I think it was 19 to.
Yeah.
I suppose at this stage, because you know, it's worth mentioning. I you know, used to talk about San Leonardo as the greatest Italian wine that you've not heard of, and these days that isn't true, because people have heard of you, and it is fascinating that, you know, over the years we have seen an incredibly loyal following of San Leonardo lovers develop. It's a very easy wine for people to fall in love with once they get to know it, and it definitely seems like the critics now are speaking with one voice. I you know, a few interesting quotes. I really liked Nick Belfrage, a wonderful guy and a great critic, saying things like, you know, the vintages of San Leonardo are more akin to Bordeaux than Bulgari, with their balance and purity, and can have an elegance and depth capable of taking on the best clarets of the world. So do you think that the identity of San Leonardo is still quite linked to Bordeaux, or is it more Italian?
I think that San Leonardo is a bridge, you know, also in terms of where it's placed. You know, it's really a bridge between the Italian interpretation of Bulgari, of Bordeaux, which is Bulgari, because most concentration of Bordeaux varieties and blends are coming from there, and it's a lovely. For example, I love Sassicaia, I love Upicaia. I'm not a fan maybe of others, but which are a bit too opulent to my taste. And San Leonardo sticks in the middle. You know, I think it has. I'm not forcefully a fan of saying that that it has to resemble to Bordeaux, but what San Leonardo has is the mountains. You know, this is the uniqueness of this Bordeaux blend. These huge mountains, this huge thermic excursion, this lack of light, which give this slight green note at the end, which is very, puts your palate very central. San Leonardo, you can taste it in a tasting, and it puts your palate back in track in a certain way, because it's so identitary. You do not get wrong with it. You know, it's one of a lot of friends of mine say, you know, it's one of the few wines that I can always recognize in blind tastings, and this is something that really makes me happy. Maybe they say it's because it's horrible and I can always spot it out, but no, apart from that. But it is a wine that you can recognize, and I think that, as I was saying about identity, it's something that you enjoy. Not today, you recognize, and this is why people have stayed loyal in those years where we started working together on San Leonardo, and it was much less known than it is today. And the people who have followed us in 20 years ago are still all with us, or 95% are with us. And this is something that really makes you happy, not only because wine is exchanging with people, and it's very nice to age together like good wines. But it's nice because it means that you have not gone wrong. You know, you're keeping up an idea about wine, and people are still enjoying it.
Absolutely, and Anselmo, I think you've partially answered Carlo's question about how do you maintain such freshness and elegance in the wines, but a specific question on how much maceration time do the grapes?
It's short. It's very short, because, you know, maceration in total is about 15 days in San Leonardo. We don't want to extract anything too much. It's all made by hand. It's manual pump over. If you came to San Leonardo, you would be shocked about the simplicity of making the wine. So here you see the concrete vats and how we extract the grapes. And there is someone inside pushing them out. So they're all on a diet in August, because they have to get into the vats. And it's really a manual pump. This is what you see from the above a vat. This is a very no studio picture done. I mean, this is really a picture of this. It's so simple, the method, but it definitely, you know, it's like making tomato juice for the pasta. And you can, it's simple, but it's complicated. And it's a question of experience and patience. This is what I always say. These are the only ingredients to San Leonardo and the cellar is experience and patience, experience and patience. In fact, the cellar, we always have 2 students in San Leonardo for the harvest, which come from the enological school next door. And we only take 2 because my director always says I have 2 eyes, so I can only take 2 because they always make a mess in the cellar. So, and they are always very sad because, you know, they think that they come here. We are very renowned for this very classic and elegant style of wine. So the students come here with the approach of trying to understand the secrets, you know, behind. And it's so simple that they are there and they say, where is the secret? You know, they don't understand. And the secret is not in the cellar. The secret is in the vineyards, because it's how you grow the grapes that makes the greatest difference. It's not what you do in the cellar. As my father says, if you're an idiot in the cellar, you ruin the wine. If you're very good, you just extract from it what it's meant to be. You know, you cannot make it better. And this is something that is interesting, and it's very true. And then blending is something different. You can then find the right you know, you find maybe in a vintage you have one plot of Cabernet which is richer, and then if it's a more I would say a less rich vintage, you use more of that plot, you know, and then you can make, let's say, miracles, in the sense that a great blender can help you putting in one a great wine, but you cannot make grapes better than they are supposed to be.
Absolutely. I think a good winemaker, as you say, is responsible for getting the very best out of what he's given, and nothing more.
And nothing more.
So if we perhaps move on to, I think we could probably treat the 08 and the 10 as almost as a pair, because
right.
I think there's a bit of an oddity here.
Yes.
In that 2009, San Leonardo did not make a 2009, so we're actually doing what is effectively consecutive vintages, 08 and 10, back to back. And I should point out that, you know, San Leonardo has won, you know, Tre Bicchiere award from Gambero Rosso in sort of every vintage as far back as we care to count, which is a remarkable achievement. But you made an 08, which people are trying now, and perhaps try alongside the 2010. Why did you not make an 09, and how was the 08 and 10, how do they differ?
Well, 9 was not made for rain, unfortunately. Hail is something that if you get hail, if it reaches you early, it's horrible. You cry, you're desperate, but you still can make wine. You will make much less, but you still can make it. If you get late August, you're gone. You don't make anything. Rain, on the other side, is horrible, because if you get rain in September or late August, it's difficult, because the plants don't have the ability. We are on a wonderful soil. Let's say this. We're on a wonderful soil full of stones. There is lovely drainage. We have very little clay in the soil. So we don't have soils that are, you know, full of water. But in 2009, unfortunately, we got rain during the harvest. It rained, it rained, it rained, it rained. It would not stop. And my father decided at the end that it wasn't that bad, but he didn't want to put the name on top of that label, you know, that's what he resulted. While 8 was a very dry harvest. It was a very dry harvest. And so, you know, when it's dry, it's quite easy to make a good wine, you know. It's more difficult when it's wet, so that is hard. And 2010 instead had a very, very wet August, and you can feel the 2 characters. So to tell you the truth, I tried to combine every single element to make the perfect recipe, you know, because you want to find the perfect recipe. And the beauty is that there is no perfect recipe, but there are facts which are true. There are facts that when you get a very rainy vintage, you tend to have less opulence, less because obviously the plants develop slightly less sugar, and depends on when you're getting the rain. Maybe they get less ripe, so the tannins are slightly greener. So you can get vintages which are slightly more dark, if you want, in the color. Dark, not in the color of the wine, but in the sense they have less. They are less bright, but they have a lot of elegance as well. So 8 and 10 are different, but still they are respectively. 8 has a bit more sun in it, you feel it, and 10 is slightly more elegant to me.
I think what's really interesting comparing them both compared to the more solar vintages is that herbaceous note comes out, and it's interesting. It's interesting that you're referencing the weather, because I in my mind, rightly or wrongly, I associate that with the Carmenere. I think that slight kind of green peppercorn note on the nose, and that slight kind of the salinity.
Also, you're right. You're not wrong, because Carmenere has that character as well.
Yeah, it's very interesting that the blend has remained
same,
almost identical every year.
Maybe it changes by 5-6% on the 3 varieties, so that it balances off again. But Carmenere, and there you said the right thing, if it doesn't ripen perfectly, and then it shows a much more greener character. So the 2 events are still connected.
Yeah, and I think what's really fascinating as we move into the 15 shortly is how the combined elements for me of this canyon that you describe, which limits the sunlight hours, but not the intensity, just the amount of sun, and the influence of the Carmenere, the free draining soils you have. These are all key elements for hopefully continuing to weather, so to speak, the climate change, which is affecting so many other vineyard areas.
I tell you, Tom, we have less alcohol than we used to have around I don't know if here there is the alcohol level. I have to introduce it in because I have all my sheets here, but
all of these are 13. I think the 04 might be 13 and a half.
And a half. So recently
13%.
14, 15, 16, 17, 18, they're all 13.
Yeah.
So it is quite surprising, and it is really given by that. And then there are 2 factors. One is the direct sun on the leaves makes the plant live better, because if you have too much warm on the plant has stress, and so that is a wonderful result for us, the fact of having less sun. And then it makes the populations of yeast come out very well and not suffer, and then in the cellar they can continue going on. So we make what is called a pied de cuve in French. So we make a harvest of about maybe 200 kilos or 300 kilos of grapes, and we put them in a vat to start fermentations maybe 4, 5, 6 days before what we think will be the starting date. We never know exactly the date we start. We taste every morning, and then more or less, depending on the weather conditions, depending on the taste of the grapes, depending on the mood of Luigino, the director, and of my father, then we have to start. Because, you always think that when there is handcraft, everybody is thinking of the minimum of the detail and everything, but then it all comes back to human beings, and then it depends also on the characters of the people you have around. And I'm very lucky. I have a fantastic team, but as all fantastic things, they have a character, and what a character sometimes, and it's not that easy to manage them all. So there are some days of bad mood which you have to take into account.
I like that. You can't pick good grapes in a bad mood. That's exactly. A great one.
You're very right. I mean, and the director is somebody. He was born here in San Leonardo. He has been living here. He's been working in San Leonardo for 45 years now, 45 harvests in San Leonardo. He's 62 now, so, or 66 now actually. And without him being in a good mood, you don't do much here. But 15 has been and the populations of yeast are well developed, so that then in the cellar they can do their proper job. And having the cellar, this is one of the other things that I have been understanding this year, the ability of having the cellar at the, how do you call it when things are on the floor level?
The ground level, on the ground level.
We don't have an underground cellar. We have a cellar on the ground level. So during the evening, we open up windows, doors. We have a terrace which opens up, let's say, and this cools down the cellar and allows temperatures of fermentation to be still quite low. And this, is fantastic. We have no air conditioning, no heating in the vats, no cooling in the vats. It's so little the work we do in the cellars, which is, that is the uniqueness, of the process also. And well, 2015, coming back, because this is what we're tasting now, has been I mean, you cannot go wrong. 15 and 16, when you drink Italian wines, 99% you will drink well. There have been wonderful vintages. I'm not saying about the wine, I'm saying about the vintage. Yeah. There have been fantastic times on which to grow grapes. They have been easy. And 15 is the first year that we turned the entire estate to fully organic. It was not certified because we were changing still. So it has been certified in 2018, but 15 has been the big starting point of this new revolution in the countryside as well,
And it's fascinating trying the 15 again this evening. I haven't tried it since release. What's really interesting for me, at least, and I'd be interesting to know what others on the call this evening feel, is whilst the nose certainly shows the richness and warmth of the year, this ripeness, this intensity, the palate actually is very, very much, it's much more San Leonardo than 2015. It's almost like there's a tension between the character of the vintage and the character of the wine. There's a tussle, like a eternal battle between, the weather on the one side and the intrinsic character of the wine on the other. And it produces a fascinating wine. Even now, even if it's youth, it's a fascinating wine.
Yeah, I think it had. I was reading the data of the vintages because I'm very bad. I never remember I always get mixed up. But 15 was a perfect year, growing year. Also with a lot of water in between June and July, the end of June and beginning of July, I think. A rainy June, and this gave a great water reservoir, for the remaining part of the summer, which was very dry. And then the harvest ended on the 12th of October, which is not bad today because it tends to be quite early. So for modern times, it has been a fantastic growing season, which has then released a wine which has body, elegance, and freshness, which is what we always look in. And the freshness is given by the acidity, all with a 13% alcohol, because a lot of people wrongly associate the amount of alcohol to the concentration of the wine, which is something which, yes, to a certain extent, obviously, if you drink a wine at 11 degrees and a wine at 16 degrees, you will feel a huge difference in terms also of concentration. But here you feel the concentrations, but without the alcohol note, which is what we look for, because a great wine has to have also certain concentration, not an exceeding. I'm not a fan of exceeding concentrations. I don't like them. But if it lacks the acidity, you lack the length of the wine, which is what gives you the great pleasure of drinking the wine. Yeah. So it always is an equilibrium. It's a balance between concentration, acidity, and alcohol. This is the trio that you want, extraction.
And I think what's very noticeable again this evening with the 15 is you've got this wonderful intensity, but without weight. You know, it's intensity without weight. There's energy. There is structure and concentration, but for me, it's a wine which lives and breathes on energy rather than mass.
It has tension.
Yeah,
huh?
exactly. Yeah.
Which I really like. Tension I really like because it makes you feel something which is there. It's like a muscle, but it's not huge. It's just a string that is there, you know, and it keeps that. It gives you limits. I don't know. No, limits is not the right way, but it gives you reference points. You know, you really feel your palate when there is tension.
Yeah. And I love that idea that you mentioned earlier of San Leonardo in a wine lineup brings you back to the center. It kind of centers you. It totally does. Now, I've been lucky enough to have a very cheeky half bottle that Anselmo kindly sent me of the 2016 vintage, which you've referenced briefly.
Did they send a half bottle, not a whole bottle? Tom, I really apologize. What a stingy man. Well, I must say, it wasn't me that time. I wasn't that stingy. That is my director who always tries to lower the quantities I send out of the estate.
If it had been a full bottle, I might not have opened it tonight. I might have.
I'm so sorry.
No, please. No, so what's fascinating, and I will only mention this briefly because you don't have it in front of you, our dear assembled attendees, but it's an amazing wine. It's quite different from the 15 on the nose. It's a wine which, if I was being really sneaky, I would stick in a lineup of Bordeaux. I would stick in a lineup of Bordeaux, and I can guarantee 99 out of 100 people would think that they were drinking a class growth Pauillac or Saint Julien for sure. It's got this incredible patrician elegance, and I mean, it's quite a remarkable wine. I think you mentioned that this might be the latter day 99. And if it is, it's going to be spectacular.
I hate to sell in a certain way to the people. I don't like to say this is the best or not the best, but it's not me who's saying this. Is Carlo Ferrini, who is our enologist since 20 years. And he wrote me a phrase which I cannot find right now because obviously I'm very untidy on my table. But he wrote to me that the phrase, he wrote that it is rare to find a wine with so much power, but still preserving the freshness and the elegance of the typicity of San Leonardo. So for him, it was him who said 99, not me, because it's a young wine, so he has the ability to see that within 10 or 20 years. You know, that is an ability which I cannot take in account for. I have other ones, but not that incredible talent of really understanding. I can see when it's a great San Leonardo or not, but referring to a wine with a 20-year difference of time and understanding how it will be, that is really talent, and that is Carlo Ferrini.
So I think, Anselmo, we've come up to our full hour. We've just kept into the time zone. For those of you who need to leave us, then we really hope you don't, if I'm honest. But for those of you who need to leave, you may. However, there were some interesting questions and comments in the chat, which I'd love just to go through. Before we turn to the grappa, there's been a few comments on the grappa, and maybe we'll do a tasting with the grappa next time. But Chris was just asking more latterly, and it's a good question, of course. In terms of the weather, how did 15 differ from 16? I mean, what was the contrast there?
I would say that 16 was slightly warmer than 15, and it's slightly even a bit drier, if you want. But like 90, Carlo Ferrini said that 99 and 16, because 99 he worked on it personally, and he did not work on 1997. But if I can see a wine today of power and elegance and drinkability, is 1997, which I did not like at all for maybe 20 years even, because I started really appreciating it in these last 3 years. I didn't like it because I thought it was a bit of an American wine, if you want. Nothing against the American taste at all, but that it was so appreciated by Wine Spectator, giving it the 12th top wine of the world at that time, that I always envisioned it as a wine very robust that would have not been able of aging. And instead, it is aging in an incredible way. And there I understood how little I knew about wine, because there you see why these journalists have the ability of seeing. And 16, maybe even closer to 1997, which was a terribly dry summer, not like 2003 in terms of heat, it was lower. So I think that 2006 is one of those vintages which will give pleasure for a long, long, long time. And the difference is, I think, on the rainfall, that 15 had more rainfall in June, which just maybe makes it a little bit more elegant and more delicate. And 16 is more, it's really abundant, you know, but still, I mean, abundant for us, and it has the same alcohol level, exactly the same. It's 13, and not one tenth more, but it's just so it has that nice and very round of palate. To me,
it's very, very supple and beautifully textured as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's no sign of cooked grape. This is difficult. You, Tom, you know what 2003 is in San Leonardo, which has been the worst vintage in terms of heat and drought. And still 2003 is one of the most lovely vintages to have at dinner time. You know, because you've always been a fan and you've always supported us in telling the story, which I think that, you know, 2003, on the bad side of a bad harvest, of a bad vintage name, has been one of our greatest strengths, because it has demonstrated what it means to have less sun. You know?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Now, Anselmo, there's some good questions I'd like us to deal with, but also because some people have to depart, I know Nathan just wanted to say a few words about the availability of the wines and the coming offer, in fact, of the 16. Nathan, over to you.
Yeah, hi everybody, and thank you, Anselmo, so much. It's just such a pleasure to see you again. Unfortunately, not in, you know, not sitting together in Soho or somewhere.
But, as we say in Italian, which in English sounds really bad, but in Italian we say in meat and bones.
Exactly. Yeah. I also have to compliment you on probably the very best PowerPoint presentation of the whole of the COVID Zoom era, where you just basically stick a page of your brochure in front of the camera. So that's an absolute classic, and I love it. I have, you know, of all the years that Tom and I have known one another, Tom had spotted your wines, you know, 7 years before the critics even started to take any note. And you were probably about the first winemaker we brought alongside us when we started Honest Grapes 6.5 years ago. Anselmo gives us wonderful access to his most recent vintages, but also selections of back vintages and across the range. And that means that all of our club members have access to those. We generally bring wines in from Anselmo about 3 or 4 times a year. And we're delighted to say that the 2016 vintage, of which I know Tom's had half a bottle. I don't think I've even had half a bottle yet, Anselmo, so please make a note. Is officially being released in mid-April, but we are releasing it to our wine club Honest Grapes this evening, and an offer will go out tomorrow to the club. And it's fantastic vintage. I personally buy wines from every vintage. So the 16 is the recent vintage. We have a lovely back collection of vintages here already in the UK, and Charlie and the rest of the team will make all those available. They're all on our website, everything we have in the UK. But an important thing to know is that Anselmo makes extraordinarily large formats and stuff, not all of which we always have in the UK. So if there's something that you don't see on the website or on our offers, and you'd like us to beg Anselmo to find the odd bottle or Nebuchadnezzar down in the back of his cellar, then please ask us. So we'll let you know what's in the UK, and sometimes you might have to wait 3 or 4 months until we get the next shipment in. the whole of the range, there's a beautiful Carmenere bottling, the Vete Sauvignon Blanc, the Riesling, the Terre, and the Villagresti will be ordering fresh pallet loads of to come on our van in early April, and they'll probably arrive at the end of April. So there's going to be lots of lovely San Leonardo arriving. But the 2016, the new offer will be made tomorrow. So it's time to stock up on the recent vintage. And thank you, Anselmo. You know, we've got unique access, and I think probably the best back vintage collection anywhere in the world of your wines. So thank you for letting us have them.
Grazie, Nathan. Thanks to you. Thanks to you.
Now to deal with a few of the questions and comments. Gosh, we've got a lot here, but so apologies. But certainly, Carlo was asking, can we talk about the 100% Carmenere bottling that you're doing, and when do you recommend to open the 2010 in Magnum?
Well, 2010, I would say you can start opening it now, because I always recommend for Carmenere at least 10 years after the harvest time. Definitely, these are wines that have the ability of aging of San Leonardo is given by the Carmenere. This is just to give you an idea. So that is the wine that ages most slowly that we have. So the longer you keep it, the better it becomes. If you have two, taste one now and then maybe wait another 5 or 6 or 10 years and then, you know, take it out again. It is unfortunately a very rare wine because we make only 5,000 bottles of it. It's a very unique wine because Carmenere has a very unique identity. But if you enjoy San Leonardo, you will enjoy the Carmenere for sure.
Brilliant, thank you, Anselmo. Then Avery, who's heading off to dinner shortly, is going to be serving the 2010 and the 2005. Saying the 2010 tastes fabulous, thank you. And what should you be expecting from the 2005?
2005 is slightly darker, less fruity, slightly more advanced in terms of tertiary elements. It has been quite a rainy harvest. I personally love 2005 because I think it's extremely elegant, and it's a good comparison, 2010 and 2005. They're not so far away from each other because also 2010 enjoyed rain rather than 2008, which was much drier in terms of summer. So expect a 2010 slightly thinner, but on that kind of idea. But then with 5 more years on the shoulders.
Perfect. And then Anselmo, lastly, there was a few questions and comments about the grappa. So maybe we can conclude this evening by tell us more about the production of the grappa and you know, because it is special.
Grappa is great fun. It's better than tequila, but don't drink too much of it because then you will regret in the morning after. It's terrible, but it's lovely. I can see there a lovely bottle of David is pouring out the Stravecchia. And grappa is made out of the pomace of the grapes of San Leonardo. So the skins, it's then boiled practically, not in what we call bagno Maria. So it's like a boiler inside of water which is heating up. So the skins do not touch the water, but they don't have a direct heat on them so that they don't burn. The steam of it becomes grappa. And then it is aged. It is a white grappa that comes out at about 85, 89 degrees alcohol. Then it is aged for about 5 years. The Stravecchia that David had, it is aged for about 5 years in the barrels where the wine was aged. And then it is diluted using water like whiskey, exactly like whiskey. So reduced, what we call reduced to about 45 degrees. And it has this very, the Stravecchia is a very lovely product because it's very smooth because 5 years in the wood anyway, smooth it off, smooth the edges off. The white grappa, the typical white grappa is slightly more rustic, but I even appreciate it even more because it's a typical grappa. It's not a question of taste, but it's a typical grappa. Lovely. I love it. And remember that if you have grappa, put a drop on your hand and then really dry it off, and then you feel the perfume, and you can feel the perfume of the pomace of the grape because alcohol is a it's like putting a cherry under spirit, you know. Then when you take it off, the cherry is still perfect after 20 years, maybe, you know. It preserves the taste in an incredible way.
It makes very good cologne as well. Once you rub it on your hands.
Oh, wonderful.